the contents and what we'll be able to cover. It's a very robust training, so we're going to jump straight into it. So today we're going to cover the CALGreen introduction to it, give a brief history of it, and then go into the residential, non-residential mandatory measures. Again, it's a pretty dense information, so we've tried to combine as much as possible, but be able to distinguish between residential, non-residential mandatory measures, also go into the voluntary measures, how you're able to achieve some of that and some of the barriers that we've had questions on. And then we'll go into the zero code impact and electrification and the impacts of that on CALGreen and zero code. And to kick off our training, I'm going to introduce the president and CEO of Okapi Architecture, Ms. Ying Wang.
Hi. Hi, everyone. It's a great day to have you coming to our work from last year. We've been working on this CALGreen. What does a CALGreen means to architect in general practice? And we just thought of it. We're very lucky to get the sponsorship of this program, and so we've been working very hard on it. So for today's seminar, we actually combined and intensified all the information within this 45 minutes information sharing that we can have with you. So I'll go very fast. So the reason we're here is I have been seeing we managing programs, Okapi architectures. So we see lots of projects. Most of the time we have about 200 projects on our desk. So we've been seeing that architects really are not quite really getting into what is CALGreen. It becoming like a long time ago, we used to do the ADA issues. It's just tons of bullet notes in the beginning of the construction documents. We just thought, oh no, because the CALGreen in a way to us is the most one that very much relate to what lead concerned or what's the sustainability in the bigger picture. So that's where the idea coming in is let's really look at what's CALGreen about, and the architects actually can take that into the design rather than just a checkbox concept. So we'll go over scope, what is scope in the CALGreen, and yes, it is mandatory, so you can't hide it any longer. And it got to be some crosswalk, there's got to be some conflicts. And then we're going into very quick of the mandatories and tiers. And it's also is a big new code concept. It's called zero code. It actually is part of it. And that part, Russell from Arup will actually step in talking about the zero code and electrification. So we kind of combine the two things all kinds of together. Move on. Oh, sorry. Okay, so I kind of explain why we're here. The most important thing is mandatory. So all of us needs to comply with it. Our next target of audience actually is the city official, the inspectors, the permit reviewers, which are not quite on the top part with it. Until that happens, I think people will take it seriously. So CALGreen is the first statewide green building code in US. It's the most forward-looking and holistic approach. So, and interestingly, is any project, almost any project, any new project, any major modernization project more than $200,000, I don't have any project less than that signed. And if you have just little additions more than 1,000 square foot, you need to comply with it. That part you need to comply with it. So it's almost like when you're practicing the office, just take CALGreen as one of the requirements you need to follow. And there is big reason that California say, yes, we need to look at create another code, which we hated, that's called CALGreen. It's because the building just tends to use the biggest amount of energy. The CO2 emission, the GHG, the water, the wastewater, and the material use. So I don't really need to repeat. I think all the AIA members are super clear with it. The right side is what's all those regulators coming upon us. And so Russell kind of, this would tie together with Russell's slide, is really coming into that there is a need for this CALGreen to coming up. So here is time for Russell from Arup.
Thanks, Ying. Hi, everyone. I'm Russell, and I just was going to talk a little bit about the broader context then in the state of California. I do a lot of work with the state directly, and so we've actually seen on recent projects an interest in building electrification. We'll talk about that later on. But you know, as we know, CALGreen and the building codes in California are you know, renewed every 3 years, and we're slowly working toward a path of zero carbon, zero emissions buildings, and zero net energy. So maybe go to the next slide. The state has adopted those targets kind of in advance of the code, so the state's definitely leading. But there's this larger context that I think it's important when you're thinking about zero codes and decarbonization and electrification, is that it starts to expand the building from just the building systems itself to questions of mobility and electric vehicles, grid reliability, and renewable energy, both on-site and off-site. And so these are all programs that are tied to the state's climate action plan to basically be a zero emission state by 2050, or you know, 2045 if you're looking at the energy grid. So if you go to the next slide. So what does that mean when we talk about kind of like where we're moving? There's lots of code development happening around the world. So the International Energy Conservation Code has a path net zero that's tied to building electrification. So you see some of that in cities already. You look at a place or a city like Berkeley, which is, you know, sort of outlawing new natural gas connections. We start to see that with clients now more and more in the private sector asking what does it take to move away from fossil fuel consumption at the building. I think we'll see a transition, and that's sort of already seen in the IEBC's code development, is a mixed fuel building. So I think that's something that we're all going to see a lot in the coming decade, is that we won't completely remove natural gas from all buildings, but we'll start to downsize those systems. If you go to the next slide. And then sort of thinking about some of that expanded realm of the project, you know, battery storage, again, something that maybe we've been familiar with in critical environments like data centers or hospitals, with you know, that rely on you know, you know, additional redundancy in terms of energy reliability. But now we're seeing more and more kind of run-of-the-mill buildings offer that. So that has a space impact in terms of design. And then electric vehicles, you know, so CALGreen has requirements around EVs that I think we'll talk about, but that's only going to intensify. And so those kinds of infrastructure decisions will have major impacts on the size of the electrical service and the gear. Those are conversations that need to be really happening at the start of a project with the utility. And then demand response, you know, it's something that's definitely common in California. A lot of us probably have demand response installed on our air conditioner at home, but that will, you know, the zero codes and marching into the next code cycle, we'll start to see that expand. So with that, I think I can pass back to Ying to take us on into the details.
Yeah, so with that bigger picture and the need for the future, that's how this CALGreen developed. And so when CALGreen was developed, in the beginning, LEED was considered as a model to follow. And then California said, well, let's develop ourselves. So you will see the organization of CALGreen is really similar to the LEED organization, but it's just a lot more simpler. So far we have 2013, 2016, and 2019 right now. And CALGreen, in a way, taking the bigger picture, really becoming a placeholder for a lot of newer and more progressive thought that California has. So when we're going over this mandatory and the tier, I'm sorry, I think you guys probably all hear the helicopter in our buildings. So you will see some of them developed very further. Some of them really are just a placeholder for some newer ideas. So basic CALGreen is developed as a Part 11 under the California code. There's a whole series of code. And it's also get agreement of all the other agencies, which is the non-residentials, where basically the most basic one is a CBSC, except basically means all of your buildings under any jurisdictions are supposed to follow CALGreen. Then the other one is the housing and the community development is accept CALGreen, and the DSA for the state project, and also the K-12 and the community college also accepted. What's the most interesting one is the ASHPA also accepted. So within ASHPA, it's just a little bit funny. ASHPA says once you do it, you also need to be 10% and better, which is what we call the Saving by Design program. That one asks for the 10% better. And so then it's allow them to get into a tier 1 and the tier 2. Once they apply the mandatory plus the 10%, then it's allowed to get into tier 1 and tier 2. So it's pretty much with this picture, you can see all of your project really should consider CALGreen from the very beginning. And we just like to bring a little bit of the rich code. All those things in a way, they're all intertwined. So rich code, many of you are very familiar with, and not all the cities comply with the rich codes yet, but the numbers are adding up. So rich code is just, generally speaking, is a way that CEC allowed individual city or county develop farther than the Title 24 and CALGreen what they allowed. So on the right side, we just identify some of the ones and some of what they specifically focusing on. So it's usually within this 5 paths. Is a building efficiencies or renewable or electrification ready or water. And the easiest one is probably is the information disclosure, basically is a benchmarking concept and process load. So we move down into the CALGreen context because I'm really watching my time is you look CALGreen, I think for all the code that I've been really into it, it's one of the pretty easy actually. You look at it, it's really 8 chapters. We will focus on 4 and 5 because it is really the meat of the code. And then look at the bottom that we describe it as appendix. And however, under that appendix, it says chapter A4, chapter A5. So appendix means tier. And chapter A4 is residential, chapter A5 is non-residential. So that's all really you need to be careful about. 6.1 is the ASHPA, which I would say is not quite there yet. As I say, is the code is still under developing. 2022 will be pretty different from 2019. So the 5 divisions in each chapters are, this is where LEED comes in, very similar to LEED. The division 1, planning and the design, so it's dealing with the site issue. And your EV chargings and EV parking space all come into division 1. Division 2, energy efficiencies, and that's very, very similar to Title 24 energy code. Then Division 3, water efficiencies and conservation. Division 4, material conservation and resource. That's kind of a newer idea within the California code, but for folks who is familiar with LEED, that's very, very much coming out from LEED. Division 5, environmental quality, which reflects all the one we are very enduring about with the COVID, with the wildfire. So we're just moving into it. And so with this bigger picture as CALGreen, many individual cities that have their own, basically based on the CALGreen as a base and just develop a further into theirs. So if your project happen into LA city, go right direct into LA Green Building Code. I think Santa Monica have the similar issues, and so is many cities in Northern California that created their own way, but it's follow exactly the same way. If you look at the code sections, that column, and it's basically exactly the same section column as the CALGreen is. So it really gives you a good tour, a good roadmap to follow for your projects. And so this one is non-residential. The previous one is residential. This is all LA City. Remember I was talking about the tier concept, and the tier concept is what they describe as a volunteer requirement. So LA City also developed their volunteer requirements. So we move into the real meat of CALGreen, Division 1, Planning and Design. For this presentation, we put the residential and non-residential side by side, easier for everyone to follow up. And so the left side is whenever it starts as a 4, that means residential. Whatever it starts with a 5 means non-residential. I want to do, the highlights we have is the difference from the residential to non-residential. For many of you probably can imagine non-residential has a little bit more requirements for the public welfare. So both sides dealing with the site, water and drainage, and both dealing with electrical parking and the vehicle charger. And then the non-residential, in addition to what residential requirements, has the bicycle parking and the light pollution reduction and shade trees. Now, under the residential one, this is probably the major difference. If you look at bottom of this bullet, under the residential is saying hotels and motels. For you are very familiar with the energy code, hotels, motels, or multiple housing belong to commercial projects. And for CALGreen, all the one multifamily hotels and motel and the student housing belong to residential. The requirements is a little bit different. However, it's not too bad. And so what's under the Division 1, Planning and Design? So I just want to bring the most part we need to look upon is the parking space. The parking space, preferred parking space as architect, remember is preferred. So it should be, usually should be next to ADA, that's a parking space, number 1 rule. The number 2 rule is even with your EV charging station, there should be at least one is able for the ADA access people be able to reach to it. And then number 3 is EV charging station right now is just ready to be charged. It's just you need to prepare the infrastructure, make sure your electrical raceway move to connect all the way to there. And I think the wiring needs to be connected as well. However, the real charging equipment does not need to be there. So one of the reasons that we developed this slide is we want to make sure that architect understand this has a lot to do with your design. It's not really just a list that you need to satisfy in order to pass the building code. So we created this emoji on the right upper corner. The smiling face means you need to put this information in your specification so the contractor can bid on it. The one that's kind of squarish looks like a floor plan. It means make sure it's actually identified in your drawings. So that's that part. And so I'll just leave the details for you to read our slide when you actually have the time, or when you actually have the projects, read through our slides. Okay, so this slide is kind of explain to you just a bit of how CALGreen look at the amount of EV charging stations as well as the EV spaces, the parking spaces. Again, we combine both together, the residential and the non-residential together. And so you have an idea over the top one, the table 4. And it gives you an idea when it's 201 and the parking over, it's basically about 6% of the EV spaces. That means the parking spaces. The one lower down the 5, the 2 tables, the one on the left side is the parking spaces. So it's about 8%, so it's a little bit higher. On the right side is the EV charging stations, that spaces is about 6%. You could make sure, you could be assured that by 2022, it would be different and the number would be higher. And so bicycle, as we mentioned, is not required in the residential code, is requirements in the bicycle in the non-residential code. For all the cities that have been involved, they all have their local ordinances. So look at the local ordinance first before you look at the CALGreen. So the concept is there got to be 2 types of parking for the bicycle, short-term and long-term. The short-term is for the visitors, long-term is for the staff. And for the staff, basically 2 concepts: security, they need to be able to tie their bicycle in some place with a key or things like that, and sheltered from the weather. So just kind of looking at that 2 elements when you do the design for your project. And further on for the non-residential. So those are kind of the ideas, and I think the light pollution reduction basically don't shine the lights towards the sky. I think most of our architects understand now that we can't just celebrate the building and polluting the sky. So that just means all the lights should shine down rather than shining up. And the next one is a grading and paving. That's also a kind of a newer concept, but it's also really architectural 101, is you need to keep the water from, especially from the weather, in your site rather than slope down to the cities, to get into the city and to get into basically go to the eventually go to the city street, and eventually go to the river or go to the ocean. Right now, all of those concepts is keep to yourself if you can find a way, either through the pavement or through your landscaping, keeping the water from the rainwater, or basically it's rainwater, keep it on your site, and really keeping up your underground water table high in your own area. So that's the concept. And shade trees is DSA only. Eventually, I think it will come out to be more. So for the DSA building only is you either using landscaping, or interestingly, you can use in your shade structure from solar panel. And then we move down to the easiest one is a division 2, is regarding the energy efficiencies. bingo, it's just Title 24, Division 9. You just comply with the energy code, so it's easy. Both residential and the non-residential follow the same rule. Now getting to the water, even we all understand water is reflected in our regular code and also plumbing code, and now it's the CALGreen code. CALGreen code is really all regarding efficiencies. And again, we put the residential and non-residential together. It's very much the same if you're dealing with the lavatories, faucet, or you're dealing with the bathrooms, the urinals, and the water closet. It's nothing extremely hard. I know all the projects I'm dealing with now is always 1.8 gallons urinals, and you can see over here, and water closet 1.28. That's really nothing new. What's a little bit more on the commercial side is using control to control the water usage. Otherwise, it's very similar to our practice, our normal practice. What's interesting one is on the bottom over here is the submitters. So it's very much to say, hey, if you have a project bigger than 50,000 square feet, you should submit it. So this will actually affect if you have project in the K-12 campuses, they have multiple buildings, and you might want to consider submitters in each buildings. Otherwise, it's also better for the building owners, so they will know if certain building has some problem, and they can identify the issues a lot faster. So water always have two issues. The last slide is about the indoor usage. This is about outdoor, and it's a very quick two major issues. One is if you have portable water use, then you got to follow the MWEL. So MWEL is a statewide requirements now, and it's covered in the plumbing code as well. Most of the landscaper or architect that I know are very familiar with how to calculate the MWEL. Basically, it says I'm going to show this slide first. It's follow the EPA, say you need to create your chart of showing with your local micro weather that you know how much water you have, and you need to fill up your landscaping type with how much water they use and comparing to the requirements. If it's under, then you're fine. Now, that's about irrigation. Now, how about the place which you have the recycled water? LA City and LA D.P. actually have recycled water. So if you place any newer project coming up, you should just check with your city if they have the recycled water plant already. You need to ask them if your site is available for them to supply the water to. So that's the requirements. And the requirements right now is all those recycled water, only for the outdoor recycled water supply. And we have plenty questions from other projects, other seminars is people ask us, how about my indoor water consumption? And that's based, then you should have that one based on what the plumbing code requirements are. I'm going backwards, sorry about that. So we finished the water, and now it's the division 4 and 5, we're almost there, and then looking at my timing. So this part is a brand new for the code, for the requirements of the code passing, but it's a very familiar subject for anyone who is familiar with the LEED. So this is relates to during construction, you create so much waste. So this one requirement is on construction waste reduction. You need to keep track of you means design team, and also if you also deal with the construction, during the construction administration, you need to make sure how much the construction waste go to the landfill. You need to decrease that number. So the number in CALGreen is says 65% right here. That's the most important number you need to remember. Now, luckily, most of the city has those requirements can easily meet those requirements. What does that mean is 65% of the waste from the construction needs to stay away from the landfill. And how do you prove it? Make sure it's in your spec, it's in your smiling face. So in the spec, we say, well, you need to show me the waste management company. Who are the one? Are they showing the annual landfill away from the landfill? The number they should disclose it yearly, and it's usually registered with the local city. And so that's one. So it's a qualified management company. Then they should show, each project should have a plan before they start. The plan means they could have estimate of how much landfill they are able to divert it away from the landfill. Then when the project actually starts, you need to collect the hauling tickets. Usually it's monthly or it's whenever it's needed. And from the contractor side, someone should make the calculation. At the end of a project, you need to be able to prove it 65%. So that's very unique for us to practice in just regular architecture. We usually do not see that. This is the newest things. And the other item is after construction is done, post-construction, that you need to show the operation maintenance manual passing down to the tenants or owners, and also should show the recycling places and the recycling location for the occupancy to put the recycled materials at. And the other one is a commissioning. So those kind of new things. And so the good things with CALGreen, they actually give you some kind of tools to, this is a worksheet for you to look at what does that mean in details. So in this one, the left side column showing all the possible materials, asphalt, wood, all the way glass, and the cardboard, all this and that. And over this side is ask you, are they commingled or they sort out of the site? Then, or they're on the side, and then the percentage of the what do they call, the diversion rate. So that whole thing's adding up together in the end of the project, it will show more than 65% is what you need to target at. Division 5 is all about indoor air quality. So two things of indoor air quality. First, protecting your buildings when it's during construction, what is it? Covered, your dock openings. Then all the one low VOC, or you have any paint, the materials you should specify in your spec again. Okay, so make sure it's followed. And the copy system, the materials that you specified should be low VOC. And again, there is, and this part is what we usually good at, architects, when your slab is ready to be used to put on the materials or the building materials for the wood. And what's interesting is the exhaust and the outdoor air deliver and the carbon dioxide monitoring. Those things are kind of a newer, more important items that I'm sure the next version of CALGreen, also the energy code will address those items, just because our current 2020 situation with the COVID and the wildfire, that's becoming more important for us to look at more than the energy efficiencies. We need to look at the energy, the air quality as well. So outdoor air quality also is another major issues coming up. Again, CALGreen provides those, the VOC limited, those charts are exactly the same when you're applying your lead project. So what does those mean? It really means in your specification, you need to add on those items into your requirements. So we're moving into tier very fast. So tier just means it's higher than the mandatory. So example, just look at this one, says water efficiencies. Mandatory just means those 1.28, the 0.125, the one that I mentioned. The tier 1 says better than that, 12% better, and tier 2 is 20%. Now, those are specifically identified. There are plenty of them not exactly identified as just as a placeholder. So this chart just gives you some idea of solar reflectance index in the planning and the design, and if you provide more EV chargings and energy efficiencies, water efficiency. So those are just some of the ideas. Some of them developed further. The material conservation, the resource efficiencies, those relates to the low VOC content, and the environmental quality is the similar ideas. So some of them hazard, some of them just a concept. If you follow, all your project follow CHIPS low emitting material list, you're basically into the tier 1 already. And continuous energy efficiencies. This is the EDR concept, is a zero carbon, zero code concept. We'll leave that off to Russell to explain it. And again, the energy efficiencies, the similar concept is the more you can do, you need to kind of show it and present it to your city as a tier 1 or tier 2. So this is just some idea of the tier 1 battery storage, thermal storage, tier 2 whole electrification with water heating. And again, using the CALGreen as a worksheet as a tool to identify what you can do. So I think those are great if when the project just starts, just identify what you can do. And this one is the non-residential volunteer matrix. It's just the idea over there. Okay, so I'm passing this one to Russell and take it over, Russell.
All right, thanks. Well, I'll try and be brief here. I'm just going to include a little more context of the Zero Code. So this is an initiative that has been supported by Architecture 2030, and it's really an overlay for the building code that can be adopted and implemented to reduce and eliminate fossil fuel consumption in buildings. So that's really the goal. And I would say the sort of second phase of the Zero Code is considering things like the embodied carbon of building and construction materials and the process of construction. So if you go to the next slide. Right, so it applies to everything in the same way the code would in terms of commercial and institutional and residential buildings, mid and high rise. And so it has basically text in it that edits and supplements the building code to include either an assumption of all electric buildings or what I said around mixed fuel earlier. So if you go to the, and it's just, yeah, go to the next one. So there's, sorry. And then there are, say on the residential and non-residential side, there are voluntary tiers to demonstrate compliance, that can be prescriptive or performance based. And so building off of an energy design rating for, say, a residential project. And it can be a combination of energy efficiency and on-site renewables and energy storage. So if you go to the next slide, right. And I just wanted to share a little bit of, say, from the field feedback around electrification currently. So if you're having that conversation with your clients, I think it's important to talk about the fact that that is sort of over and above what the code is asking us to do today. And you can, if you don't manage that well, you can pay a penalty for that in terms of your Title 24 compliance. So part of the challenge we have is the codes are moving ahead, industry's moving ahead, while the way that we comply and demonstrate compliance hasn't moved ahead. You might even work with a local authority having jurisdiction or for plan review that isn't quite sure how to review the documentation for, say, your energy compliance. And so, you know, in CALGreen and showing compliance with energy performance, it's based on time-dependent valuation, which tends to privilege, and say for heating at least, a natural gas-based system. And so you end up with an electric building that is being compared against a natural gas baseline, and you can show a penalty for that. And so we, I think it's important to have that conversation with your electrical and mechanical engineers very early on to come up with a kind of agreed strategy for demonstrating compliance. So one of the things that we've done is that you make the heating system identical between the baseline and the proposed, and then show that the building would comply, and then basically demonstrate that the proposed electrical system is not worse than that. But it's important to get buy-in in writing very early on with the AHJ, so there's no issues. So again, it's always a kind of one-off process for now. So it's important, I think, to manage risk for a project if you're going all electric, to do that early on. So next slide, I think is, yeah, that's the end.
Yeah, that's
right on time.
Yeah, we kind of are really trying to squeeze a lot of information within a very, very short time. So I think the idea is that this slide is hopefully that you can use this slide really as a resource when you actually do your project. The CALGreen site, we did all our research with all the section numbers next to it. So hopefully that will help you quite a bit.
Okay, we got a few questions in just a moment ago, but I wanted to be able to cover some of the questions that we had. One was we'll go back to the beginning of the presentation, how it affects remodels and upgrades. It's pretty clear for new construction, but how does it affect the remodels?
So its requirements in the slide saying when your remodels have more than $200,000, yes, you need to comply with the CALGreen.
At 1,000 square feet.
That's addition. If you have you have addition more than 1,000 square feet. So that 1,000 square feet area needs to comply. I think the major part is the remodeling, because you could imagine your remodeling with the CALGreen commissioning is probably the biggest difference than the Title 24. CALGreen's commissioning just covers a lot more. So that's probably the biggest price tag you need to analysis as architect from the very beginning.
Okay, and then we had some questions about EV, the parking count. If it's in addition to the required vehicles for res and non-res, and also EV parking versus EV charging, are they one and the same?
The two separate things. EV parking is whatever we actually don't call EV parking. They actually call, I forgot what they call. But so it's applied to electric car, and so also the hybrid actually plug-in also considered. And so it's hydrogen cars. That's all considered as the EV car spaces. Now for the EV charger number is totally different. And again, the code right now only says you just need to have the infrastructure ready, which means you got to have the raceway ready from the panel in your building or in some place all the way to the final locations. They should have a junction box ready, right? So Russell, if I'm using the wrong word, let me know. And the wire should be inside. And that's all. The charging equipment does not need to be there. However, take advantage right now, there are so many incentives from the utility companies. So if you have a project, you should just tell your owner, just go ahead, do it, because it's just going to be more requirements throughout the years. So that's one question, right? And what was the other one? Sorry. I think two questions. Yeah.
Okay, that was yes. And then we have something specific for OSHPOD. Are there any good resources that also include the energy code for OSHPOD 1, 2, and 3 project?
So is someone asked this question, maybe should give me a hint. I know, I don't remember the 1, 2, and 3. So something with, so it's, I have this written someplace, but so it's OSHPOD has 2 types of project. One is really hospitals that deal with the people's life. There's also the regular type is when you have the almost like the clinic and office type that you do not need to worry about it. So OSHPOD right now says there have to be Title 24 energy efficiency compliant. However, they still have plenty exempt from the typical Title 24. And I think that from the same point, it applies to the CALGreen. So if this answer is not clear enough, I will write it to you, have a better understanding. Because we also taught the Title 24 energy efficiencies when OSHPOD come out. When the Title 24 come out, say now it's include OSHPOD, and our consultant actually working on OSHPOD project, finding all the exempt from OSHPOD side. So Title 24 say, yes, we include all the OSHPOD. However, when you actually work on it, it's not. So there's layers of complexity, and I'll be happy to just write an email out later on.
Okay, Russell, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to. I work on a number of hospital projects, and so I could probably spend the rest of the day talking about this. But I mean, yeah, so it can get very complicated. But I was just going to say, from a simple perspective, you know, like on an OSHPOD 1 project, which is like an acute care hospital, right? You know, the implications. I would assume that you're doing sort of the basic things that CALGreen would expect, which is you're writing a basis of design that clearly identifies the systems and the energy, you know, goals, energy efficiency goals for the project. There's probably an owner's project requirements document that lays out those expectations. There's a commissioning plan. I mean, if you don't have a pretty comprehensive commissioning plan, you know, and a metering strategy for a hospital project, then maybe you should have that conversation with your client first. So those are some of the basic requirements that Title 24 or that CALGreen brings into to OSHPOD projects. You know, the big elephant in the room is mechanical systems, and currently there's kind of no credit for improvements beyond the baseline systems. And so, you know, that will change. And I think this is just, I don't see it as a huge, you know, it's not a huge leap yet. It's kind of just starting that. It's almost like a cultural shift where I think in the next 10 years, I would expect OSHPOD to start adopting more rigorous requirements, because hospitals are among the biggest energy consumers in the state.
And we're also going to provide our contact information. So to Jahajit, we'll have that for both Russell and for Ying in our next slide. So please don't hesitate to contact us just in case we didn't answer the question or you need more detail. Oh, Reese, okay. I have a general question. What about gray water? And there was building electrification required, but I think that was prior to Russell and Ying covering that. So I don't know if you have any more comments related either to gray water or building electrification.
So as I said, people are kind of mixing with the terminology in the code. The recycled water means the water coming from the public, that there is the recycle place from the public and shipping the water to your site. And in California, we just call it the purple pipe because the pipe is basically that's a pinkish, purplish color. And the gray water, we usually we define it as the water in the site that you collect from the rainwater or from your building usage, and you need to go through the process and to clean it up to a point that can be used for your water closet. Usually that's where it's being used, or for irrigation. And so the gray water requirements should comply with what's a plumbing code allowed, which is right there. I saw it myself before I actually had a project using it. And so that's where you should find. CALGreen does not specifically talking about gray water, only talking about this recycled water from the public. And that's that.
Okay. Well, you guys, their fingers are a lot faster than mine. So a few more questions on embodied carbon. Will the new zero code include requirements of the Buy Clean California Act and or the Marin County low carbon concrete codes?
Well, I think the short answer is no. But and I think that Buy Clean has kind of been stalled basically for the last few years. I haven't looked, checked in. I don't follow it like monthly. But the last time we had conversations with the state about it, it was kind of like not on the radar. Certainly not in relation to buildings. So Buy Clean was really just addressing infrastructure spending. For the most part, highways or those kind of larger infrastructure projects, and famously excluded concrete. So I think there's a lot of work to do on that yet, and certainly before we get to the building side. I think that I've noticed on LEED projects or projects that have adopted a more progressive sustainability strategy that the use of whole building LCAs and to meet that material and resources credit is getting more common. It's getting easier to do that. There's new tools out that make those kind of embodied carbon calculations easier to use as an iterative design tool. I don't see the codes adopting that anytime soon because really the impetus for Buy Clean was to start generating data sets to really benchmark what an acceptable embodied carbon level was in various materials. And I think that we're still, since that's been stalled, we just don't really have an understanding of what's considered good. So I think that there's probably a good, conservatively, I would say I would expect that to happen over the next 10 years.
Okay, and with just a couple of minutes left, I'll take one last question, then I'm going to address a comment that was made earlier. So for electric resistance heating, the individual thought that there wasn't a penalty used for the performance approach in the energy modeling.
Well, when I guess that's our experience, and we're comparing something like or like we're looking at a heat pump system compared to a natural gas-based, boiler. It's hard. The software has limitations for how you model it. This is a performance-based design, and so our energy modelers usually do that comparison of the same system, and then have that conversation with the plan reviewer about the better performance of the heat pump on the side of that. So on a TDV basis, we've typically found that there is a penalty related to that. I mean, natural gas systems on a cost basis, not first cost, but operational, are still a good business case in the state.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then the comment that was at the beginning of the presentation is, which statewide environmental justice groups or organizations should, I assume we're speaking about the greater AIA, be building a stronger coalition with? We're trying to strengthen our relationships with the environmental justice groups in LA, and I think it would be helpful to do this as a statewide basis. So it's not really more of a question, it's like I said, a comment, but I thought it was very good to consider for AIA collectively across California.
I agree.
But you can provide any thoughts.
I think AIA is doing something already, and Bea and Frank probably is better person to respond in the bigger picture. That's how the AIA, and I know that the AIA has subcommittee groups that formed already to address those issues. Frank, do you want to talk a little bit, or where is Bea? Yeah.
Roughly, the AIA California has developed and appointed an equity, diversity, and inclusion committee, which I think their first meeting is the end of this month. And it's a formation committee to start to address and pull together all of the issues surrounding that and determine what pathway and what kinds of things that we need to do to bring that to pass. So we're in the infancy stages on it, so it's happening. They'll make the call. So just stay tuned, and I'm sure there's going to be plenty of publicity on it shortly. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank.
Perfect. So as we're closing up our last 60 seconds, again, you see our contact information. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us if we weren't able to answer your questions, or if another question comes up, please let us know. Hillary also wanted me to remind everyone that the AIA California staff will submit the AIA credits for everyone that's participated today. And also the session was recorded, and there will be a copy of the PDF and the recording on the AIA California website. So on behalf of Russell, Ying, myself, we thank you very much for participating today and hope that you get a lot out of it, and wish you all success as we move into our future of more robust, I guess, regulations, if that would be a good thing, but a clean and green California. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
You.
Bye.